Greetings and salutations. Welcome all to this month's edition of the Transylvania Lectures series. My name is Emőke Gábor. I am a student of the Mathias Corvinus Collegium's university program from Kolozsvár, Cluj-Napoca. This event aims to create a platform for the local public where we invite renowned academics from all around the world with whom we can discuss topics relevant and interesting not just for our Transylvanian society, but for the larger intellectual sphere too. The honor has been bestowed upon me to present our esteemed guest and today's topic. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Please welcome our guest, Dr. Peter Boghossian, philosopher, educator, author, and senior visiting fellow at MCC. He is currently a founding faculty fellow at the University of Austin and the director of National Progress Alliance. His fundamental objective is to teach people how to think through what often seem to be intractable problems. Thus, his primary research areas are critical thinking and moral reasoning. On the other hand, please welcome today's moderator, Boton Csoma, lawyer, political scientist, politician, and member of the Romanian Parliament. Today's lecture will provide us with practical guides for having impossible conversations with people who hold different beliefs. Whether they are political, religious, or moral, we will learn strategies to guide us through these difficult conversations. Let the lecture begin. Mr. Boghossian, Mr. Csoma, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Thank you, everybody, for coming in. Welcome. This is my first time in Romania, and I have to say that I'm liking it so far. So tonight, I've been working and studying and researching the area of thinking, how to think, what it means to think, how to talk to people with different beliefs. And I'm going to summarize some of those key strategies in 15 minutes. Oh, by the way, do we have a clock?
Yes, let's have it.
Okay, so if I go over...
Shut this off.
Just tell me to shut up. Okay. So I developed these strategies in working in the prisons. I had a very fortunate career and a fortunate life in that I've been able to ask, I truly don't even know at this point, 100,000 people at least, what they believe and why they believe it. And I had a very interesting conversation with a man. I taught in prisons for years for my dissertation, and I had a very interesting conversation with somebody who had killed somebody. And he discussed, not in great detail, but in enough detail to let myself know, and everybody else know why he was justified in that, why he had no remorse whatsoever for taking a human life. And I realized something crucial in that moment. It's a very old question. This is Socrates' question. When you ask somebody why they did what they did or why they believe what they believe, the vast majority of people will tell you the answer. On the rarest of occasion, someone will. In fact, most people love to talk about what they believe. So I'm going to suggest an alternative tonight. This is not an alternative maybe you'll ever hear. And this is kind of a heresy, almost. It's a blasphemy. It's taken as this is just what we should do. We should ask people why they believe what they believe, and we should listen. There's nothing wrong with the question of why do you believe what you believe, but I'm going to give you a few tools that you can walk out of here tonight and immediately begin to use. Here's the problem, or a problem, with asking someone why they believe what they believe. Doesn't matter what it is. Muslim immigration, Ukraine, abortion, the issue is irrelevant. When you ask somebody why they believe what they believe, and they tell you why they believe what they believe, they increase their confidence in what they believe. So I'm going to suggest a different question that you ask somebody. I'm going to suggest the question, what would it take to change your mind? It's a very simple question. So you're not asking someone why they believe it. You're asking somebody, oh, that's interesting. Under what conditions would you be willing to revise what you believe, to change what you believe? Would it be, could I give you a piece of evidence? Could I give you, I don't know, like if you felt differently, if people in your society told you this, if you read it on the internet, would you think differently about it? Okay, so I'm going to construct I'm going to give you a template that you can use. The first order of business when you have a conversation with somebody, the deeper the divide, the more, in other words, the more disagreement there is on an issue, the more you have to build rapport. And rapport building is just letting people see you as a human being, not somebody who has a different belief. And unfortunately, this is very true. We spoke about this at lunch today. In the United States now, we see a kind of contagion that's spreading outward. In that if somebody believes something different than you, particularly politically with Biden or Trump, it's not just that they're wrong, it's that they're bad people. So Socrates had the idea that if everybody had the same starting point, if everybody had the same information, they'd come to the same conclusion. And it's very easy for people to look at you as a bad person or an enemy. So that rapport building stage, which is 2 to 3 minutes in a relationship, is very important. And in that stage, you just want to get to know someone, always ask sincere questions, try to find commonalities. What do you do? What do they do? Quick thing to avoid. You want to avoid any kind of parallel talk. It's called parallel talk. Everything that I'm saying, by the way, I'm condensing a crazy amount of stuff into 15 minutes. So it comes from hostage negotiations, psychology, drug and alcohol treatment, improvisational comedy. So if we're having a conversation, and where did you say you're going to go? You're going to go somewhere? Just how do I go to Bucharest? Okay. So we're having a conversation. He says, hey, I'm going to go to Bucharest. I don't say, oh, I was in Bucharest. I had a great time. I drank great wine. No. I took the thing that he gave me and I made it about myself. So you want to be careful in the rapport building stage in particular that you don't do that. So you want to keep the conversation localized on the person. So remember the golden rule. The deeper the divide, the more important the rapport building should be. The next thing you want to do is, this is going to sound so obvious, but it's just mind-blowing how people have written whole books about this, how to listen to somebody. Many of our disagreements come because I think you're talking about something, you think I'm talking about something, but there's an expression in English, like two ships sailing in the night. You're just passing each other. So what you want to do is, once you think you've understood what someone has to say, you want to repeat it back to them. But you want to repeat it back to them with the burden on yourself. So you'd say this, oh, that's really interesting. I just want to make sure I have this right. Do I have this right? And then you repeat it back to him. Now, in English, I don't know if this works in any other language. I just know English for the purpose of these strategies. In hostage negotiations, when hostage negotiators speak to people who have taken hostages and are about to kill them, when they do this technique, it's called Rappaport's first rule. They're looking for 2 words. That's right. That's it. Well, if I say, notice I put the burden on myself. Do I have that clear? Not, you were unclear. Put the burden on yourself. If he says that's right, that's money in the bank. That's exactly what you're looking for. Now, if he says yes or good, that's fine. You can continue with the conversation. If he says no, then here's an example of what you'd say. Oh, I'm sorry. Could you please explain that to me again? Okay, so You built rapport with somebody. You've listened to somebody. You've repeated back to them so that you've gotten so that you know that they know that what you're talking about. Two more things. The last thing we already know what to do is, would you be willing to change your mind? Okay. But before you ask that, there's a great little question that you can ask somebody. I use this all the time. I'm telling you, this is so effective. It's like, it's like, you ever see the original Star Wars? These are not the drones you're looking for. This is kind of like that. It's an unbelievably useful thing. So beliefs, if somebody says they believe something, beliefs aren't binary, right? Beliefs aren't on, off, 100%, zero. I think I know how many ounces this is. I don't even know how many ounces, 500 mil. I don't even know what a milliliter is. But anyway, so I think so I have a degree of confidence in my belief. So here's the next question in that sequence: rapport, listening, repeating back. The next question is, that's really interesting. How confident are you in that belief? Like on a scale from 1 to 10. With 1 being, I'm not at all confident. No one's going to be 1, or they wouldn't tell you they believe it, right? But you give it to them so they have the idea of a scale. 5 being maybe, 7 being I'm pretty sure, 9 being I'm like almost positive, and 10 being I'm absolutely positive. Almost all people will say, well, like if you say, is abortion an issue in this country? Is that like an issue?
Not at the large scale.
Well, what's
certain instances, yes, but not at large scale.
What's it? I assume the war is an issue.
Yes,
Okay.
the war is an issue.
Okay. Well, if it wouldn't be, I'd be quite surprised. That was a joke. Either it wasn't funny or it didn't translate well. So you'd say, okay, so should Romania be arming the Ukrainians? Let's say, I have no idea what you believe about this, but let's say he says, I think it should. Oh, that's interesting. On a scale from 1 to 10, how important do you think that is? Let's say he says, I don't know, like 8. So you now know, and again, I have no idea what he thinks about that. But now you know the confidence that he has in the belief. And you can immediately follow that up with, oh, that's really interesting. What would it take for you to be a 7? Or what would it take for you to be a 9? When you place something on a scale, you can do amazing things. If anybody's interested, after this, I can tell you more things you can do that it's incredibly cool. I've published a ton of stuff about this. So, real quick, there are only so many things people can say to you, okay? So you now have a scale. Then you ask, what would it take to change your mind? And you really want to listen to see what it would take to change his mind. Okay, so this is a basic template for how to have a conversation with somebody who has a different belief. Now, there are a few things. It's far better to be the questioner. It's when you're trying to communicate across particularly a moral divide. Most political divides are moral divides. When you're trying to communicate across those divides, try to do more listening, more active listening, and as much as possible, try to end it with a question. And one of the reasons for that is you'll find that most people love, this is gendered too, so if you're a young man in here, you're going to buy me 10 drinks for this, because this is awesome. When you go on a date with a woman, like, listen to her. Like, actually listen to what she says. And don't talk about yourself. Most people love to talk about themselves. So you're always going to end with a question. You're going to ask, think of it as a detective. You're a kind of a detective, and you're trying to figure out what someone believes. Now, let's say that somebody believes something that's just so freaking weird. Like, you can't fathom that anybody can seriously hold that belief. I meet fellow Americans who believe that stuff constantly. There are things that you can do. in that situation. So let's say you ask someone something and they say, yes, I'm a 9.5. You say, oh, that's really interesting because I've been thinking about that and I'm a 3. Can you please tell me, notice the question, not a command. You're not commanding anybody. Can you please tell me how I could get to 9? Like, what do you know that I don't know that would help me get there? So one of the other thing that you want to do in these is you want to turn the temperature down. You always want to lower the temperature on the conversation. You always want to just bring things down. You never want to make an adversarial relationship. So the more adversarial the relationship is, the less likely, well, the more likely people are going to lose their temper, but the less likely that someone is either going to change their beliefs or you're going to change your own. Quick story, my mentor was a super interesting guy. Frank Wesley was his American name. His German name, he was Jewish, was Franz Wilson. And he was picked up on Kristallnacht by the Nazis. And they complete horror story, as you can imagine. But they took him to Buchenwald. He eventually left Buchenwald, went to the United States, joined the United States military, and went to liberate the same concentration camp in which the Nazis put him. He told me a really interesting piece of research. In the Korean War, there were a surprisingly large number of American soldiers who defected to the enemy side. So in other words, they were Americans, they were soldiers, they defected, and they then either fought for or they literally went over to the other side. And people were mystified by this. They couldn't figure it out. And a team of researchers researched that, and they found out something super interesting. Every single person who defected, do we know the word,
Yeah.
Defected, yes? Okay. Every single person who defected came from a single U.S. barracks, one single barracks. And in that barracks, they were told Koreans are monkeys, they're pigs, they're scum, they're evil, they're bastards. And when their captors treated them with even the smallest amount of kindness, they realized that the things that they had been told were false. There were many, many, many stories, and so then, hence they defected. There are many stories. We know something. Here's what we know for a fact. We know that people are more likely to change their beliefs from the point of view of psychological safety. We know that. So in any conversation in which you engage, you have to try to create a safe environment. That's one of the reasons that I suggested strongly you spend a few minutes, don't just dive into it, but spend a few minutes on the rapport building stage, right? Spend a few minutes getting to know someone, finding commonalities, asking questions, what do you like, what do they like, etc. Okay. How are we doing for time? Am I 15 yet? Am I over?
Yes.
I am quite over? Oh, no, okay.
I can't give you a few minutes.
No, I just said, okay, so I'll just hand it real quick. So look, so you have a template now, right? You have something you can walk out and immediately start to use. But let's say that this goes wrong. Let's say you're going on and you're like, oh, this Boghossian guy, you told me this, and this is actually a catastrophe. This is what you can do. You got two choices. You can walk away politely, especially if you're a woman or a young woman and the conversation gets heated. You always walk to other people. Or you can just let people be wrong. You can let somebody have a different belief than you have without that damaging a relationship. And for young people in particular, with social media, that's very difficult. All right, so bottom line, you've got rapport, you're listening, you're asking questions, you're repeating it back to somebody, asking them to put it on a scale, what's next, who remembers? Uh-oh, this whole talk was a complete disaster. Okay. And then you're asking the question, how could I be wrong? What would it take to change your mind? What would it take to make you, you're a 7 on a scale? What would it take to make you an 8? What would it take to make you a 6? And I have videos that I've done, hundreds of videos where I put people on. In fact, I'm going to do these tomorrow. I ask people to stand on lines and then move on the line so that people can see what they believe. So, but if all that fails, it shouldn't fail you. Keep the temperature down, but if all that fails, remember, it's okay. You can still remain friends with someone and have fundamental disagreements. That's it.
Thank you. Now we will start our discussion, which will last about 45 minutes, and then we will have a question and answer section. Last year, I read the public letter you wrote at the time of quitting Portland State University. I read that public letter you wrote at that moment, and I saw that you formulated some harsh accusation in that letter, and now I am citing from that public letter. Students at Portland State are not being taught to think, rather they are being trained to mimic the moral certainty of ideologues. Faculty and administrators have abdicated the university's truth-seeking mission and instead drive intolerance of divergent beliefs and opinions. This has created a culture of offense where students are now afraid to speak openly and honestly. I notice signs of the illiberalism that has now fully swallowed the academy quite early during my time at Portland State. Could you a little bit elaborate on this and
Sure.
give us some details? I have to say that I was astonished when I read that public letter you wrote at that moment.
Yeah, it was. I wish I could say that it was astonishing to me, but I try not to think about it anymore. It's really heartbreaking. But so I taught philosophy. I was hired to teach philosophy, and I love Socrates. I always loved ancient Greek. Socrates in particular is my favorite philosopher. And he used to, I mean, they put him to death, so things didn't work out too well for him. But so he used to ask people difficult questions, right? So in all of his dialogues, he's asked, or almost all of them, he's going around, he's asking people questions. And I made that the core of what I did. I said I worked in the prisons, I taught in prisons, I would ask prison inmates Socratic questions. And I found over time, like I think around 2012, I started noticing a kind of, I just thought they were one-offs, like, oh, well, there's a person who has some, I don't know, emotional problem. But then it became more and more of a pattern. I mean, I could tell you stories. So look, here's the problem. So when I wrote that letter, the letter you read was very different from the original letter I wrote. The original letter I wrote, I gave it to a few of my friends and they said, you can't write this. Like, nobody's gonna believe this. This is too crazy. I was gonna use a swear, but I won't, so it's too fucking crazy. Nobody is gonna believe this. So I had to keep taking things out of the letter. You know, I mean, I would do constant investigations that I was under. There were completely insane accusations. Like, and it was just chronic. It was constant. So I couldn't do what they hired me to do. They had a pathological hatred of me, and there's some good reason for that. There's some good reason for that. I knew exactly what I was doing when I fought back. So I'm not a victim in all this. I knew exactly what I was doing, and I'd do it again.
Had you any allies in the university?
Great
Among the professors, or all the other professors were against you in this procedure? I read that also you had a disciplinary procedure, Title IX.
Many disciplinary procedures. Yeah, that was a serious one. So people would come up to me on the street, my colleagues, and they would whisper things to me. Like, oh, that's great. These people are insane. They're crazy. I say, oh, well, why don't you say that publicly? No. I don't want to lose my job. Okay, so people would come up to me. I had a person inside who would keep emailing me things from a Proton mail account, an encrypted mail. I still don't know who they were. And they would tell me what everybody was saying, which I thought was interesting. What was, super interesting. So this is, okay, so right now we're living through Culture War 2.0. We just emerged from Culture War 1.0. And my guess is that people here are at least somewhat aware of Culture War 2.0. So Culture War 1.0 was more or less atheists versus Christians. And there were certain rules that each side followed. Culture War 2.0 is a very, very, very different culture war. So in Culture War 2, I published a piece about this in the American Mind. Culture War 2.0, there are certain rules of engagement, right? So everywhere I go, I tell people this, and they look at me like I'm crazy. But there are no policemen, there are no police officers that I can see here. Like, you could never do this in the U.S. Everywhere I go, I have armed security everywhere. Like, you could never have a group like this. So Cultural War 2.0, you have rules of engagement, right? Nobody's throwing feces at me, no one's spitting at me. So there are certain rules that people abide by. But to answer your question, the reason I'm telling you that is because I'm a pretty staunch atheist. The people who came to my defense, and I can tell you the name of one of them, Bruce Gilley, is a Christian. It was the Christians, overwhelmingly, the 3 Christians I know and 1 Jewish guy came to my defense. Nobody else. And I thought that was really interesting because I just spent the last, I don't know how many years writing about atheism. In fact, my first book was entitled A Manual for Creating Atheists.
And the Christian came to defend.
All of them. And all for 3, probably the only 3 there were. Now, keep in mind, when you look at, from the National Association of Scholars, put out a report, I think it was like 98 or 99% of all donations were to Democrats from Portland State. So it's very, very, it's not liberal. Okay, so that's your thing. You can't think about this anymore in terms of conservative, liberal, right? It's just, those don't, they worked great in Culture War 1.0. We're in a different landscape now, and you just have to think differently about it.
You also said that in that letter that you somehow you wanted to challenge the new orthodoxy, the new beliefs, by publishing 4 papers,
Right.
stupid papers, and you wanted to challenge the peer review system and the publishing
Correct.
System. Basically, you claim that if you use the proper language and the certain ideological approach, you can publish anything stupid which has no touch with the reality. That was you claimed that.
Yeah, that's the nicest way you could possibly say it. Yeah, and I'm giving a talk tomorrow that's free and open to the public, and I start the talk with a quiz, and so I'm going to put up on a screen, or a PowerPoint screen, papers that I wrote that were insane, and papers that exist in the literature, and I'm going to challenge everybody in the audience to tell me the difference. And there's no way, unless you cheat, like you pull out your phone, there's no way you could just tell the difference. And so we published things like the conceptual penis as a social construct, claiming that penises were responsible for climate change. We asked the question, why don't men like very large objects inserted into their anuses? And we said that it's because they're transphobic, which is, they're not even related to each other.
And these were published newspapers?
Yeah. We translated Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf. We have 2 translations of the Führer's Mein Kampf.
Oh yeah, I read that too.
Yeah, thank you. No, we published an article saying that morbidly obese people should be allowed to compete in competitive bodybuilding. In fact, we demanded it. We published an article. The one that got us in the most trouble, the one that got us actually caught for the whole thing, we made a mistake, but the one was, it was so crazy. We claimed that there was a researcher who closely inspected the genitals. I think it was like 10,000 dogs. And then hit dog parks in Portland, Oregon, and then interrogated their owners as to their sexual orientation.
Of the owners, the dog owners.
Yeah, like And we claim that, they would beat their dogs if they were gay. But if they're just, so we claim that, so the paper was so crazy, it claimed that these dog parks are like rape condoning spaces. And that we need to leash men like we leash dogs. But the idea there is that if it's more, Alan Sokol said, if it's morally fashionable, if you can figure out the zeitgeist, if you can figure out what people think they should believe, well, write it. So the review system wasn't concerned with figuring out what's true. The review system was concerned with forwarding certain narratives, certain ideas about how they wanted the world to be. And the dangerous thing about that is you then formulate public policies on the basis of what these lunatics put in their journals, right? Because when you're asked, well, how does someone know that? And they say, oh, well, that's, like in Christianity, ultimately it comes down to faith. Or Islam, it doesn't come down to faith, but different religious traditions. But you don't need faith for this at all. No faith is required. Zero faith is required. You just point to the peer-reviewed journal. Well, how do we know that morbidly obese people should be in competitive bodybuilding? Well, there's a paper on it. Someone wrote a peer-reviewed paper on it, and the world's renowned experts viewed the paper, and they passed it in this peer review, and now we can form public policies on this. I mean, it's completely insane. And so we have people walking around believing that they know things that they simply do not know. In fact, not only do they not know, when my kids were young, they used to say it's opposite land. It would be like opposite land. It's the opposite of what they think is true. Now,
And in this peer review system, were sociologists involved? When you publish newspaper, only philosophers? Or
no.
How does this, how is this procedure of peer review system? So if you are a philosopher and you publish a paper, then in the peer review system, it comes another philosopher or two philosophers and say their opinion, or see philosopher.
Three philosophers, so it doesn't have to be philosophy to be whatever. We pretended to be other people, researchers. We submitted these completely insane papers, and some of them weren't just insane, they were vile. We said that as a form of experiential reparations, white men should be put on the floor in chains and for their college classes, and people can, black people or whoever can just walk over them. Because black people suffered slavery, and so we need to kind of correct for that. That's called equity, by the way, equity. I got lost. What was your question again? I can't even remember. Oh, how does it work?
Peer review
Okay.
system,
Yeah.
you have sociologists or only philosophers? Because
No, everybody.
My assumption
They
is
have
that
everybody.
the sociologists, they know the social reality. They
No.
make research and
No, that's all bullshit.
no, they don't know. Okay.
No, I mean, because look, look, in psychology, you're a psychology major, there's something called the replication crisis. 50%, think about this, 50% of the papers cannot be replicated. I bet you they didn't tell you that, did they? No, they don't tell you that, right? Because they have a vested interest in not telling you, right? It's like, excuse the martial arts reference, but it's like if someone does a fake martial art and they do it for so long, they become vested in it, even though deep down they know it doesn't work. So they're living a life of delusion. We have we have people who have jobs for life, and you need to speak openly and honestly. These people are complete charlatans. They are putting forth their moral impulses in journals. They are testing students on those. Their students are responding, and if you get the wrong answer, in other words, the answer that doesn't morally comport with their beliefs, they will mark you down. You do this long enough, you have a whole, this is why the United States is in the woke mess it is, because we have a whole generation of people who have been raised on complete madness. Let us also speak honestly about this. There is simply, not only is there no evidence for much of this stuff, trigger warnings, safe spaces, microaggressions, all stuff, there's actually evidence against it. I get emails from my kids' schools. Well, my son is in college now, but my daughter's school. All the time, equity, 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 equity. Anybody speak English as a first language in here? That's a shame. Okay. So if you ask a person who speaks English as a first, hey, when is the first time you heard the word equity? You could find a friend and ask them who speaks English. Hey, what does this equity thing mean? Equity is a term that's used in banking. It means like how much money you have in your house. Like if you have a $100,000 house and you have 50,000 in there, you have 50,000 in equity. But equity in the new religion means something very different.
Fairness, moral
Yeah.
approach.
Yeah, it means that, in the words of the chief anti-racist Ibn X. Kendi, you make up for past discrimination with present discrimination. You're justified in discriminating against someone right now on the basis of the color of their skin, their gender, their sexual orientation, because in the past, that part is true. We've done terrible things, for example, to gay people and black people. Like, nobody is denying that. Terrible, unthinkably bad things. But their solution to that is an equity-based solution. This is not falsifiable. There's no evidence for this at all. This is pure ideology. That's all it is. It's a belief system that people in the academy have who have jobs for life, and they push it.
So basically say that's a secular religion,
It is a secular religion, yeah.
like Marxism.
Yeah, you could take anything, but yeah, like Marxism.
I was asking about sociologists because my assumption was that they have an empirical approach, being sociologists. But there is
Okay.
no empirical approach on ideology. I understood. Okay.
But you can have, okay, but that's the other thing. You can have an approach that you claim is based on evidence, but even if you did, if you published a paper that went against the narrative, that paper would never get in. We know this, Jerry Coyne writes this about a lot. This is written about over and over again. There is a dominant moral orthodoxy. If you don't go along with the dominant orthodoxy, you can't publish. If you can't publish, you don't get tenure. If you don't get tenure, you don't have a job for life. And if you do, you then can teach all of these ideas to people year after year after year. So we've created, particularly in the United States, but in the Anglosphere, we have created a generation of people who believe things that are simply false. There is zero evidence for equity. Zero. Literally zero. What evidence could there be? It's a moral stance.
Could you present the main elements of the woke movement in the United States, the U.S. Cultural War? How did this enter the universities across the U.S.? When did this begin? Does the woke movement have the necessary means to address racial questions, or it just divides, generates deeper divisions in society? And is the woke movement somehow a secular religion in a sense like Marxism?
Yeah. Wow, those are huge questions. Okay.
But mainly about the main elements of the woke movement and how entered is the across the universities across America.
Okay.
When did it become the main orthodoxy of the in the universities in the United States?
Okay, so let's talk about what this is. What is this phenomenon that the United States is exporting around the world? And let me just be crystal clear about something. I am not a conservative. I am not religious. In fact,
So you are a liberal.
I wouldn't say I'm a liberal. No, I wouldn't say, I'm certainly socially liberal. I don't really care what anybody does with themselves. But I'm not saying this because I'm some kind of Christian conservative. I'm saying this because it's just, it's completely insane. So I'm gonna lay out the fundamental beliefs of the system. And I just wrote a foreword to a guy in India's book, Rajiv Malhotra, who wrote an amazing book about how the United States does this around the world in general, but in specific in India. He's an Indian public intellectual. And that book it took me forever to read. It's 864 pages. It is a massive book that talks about wokeness as a neo-colonial export to India and the rest of the world. Okay, so let's talk about what these people believe. Part of the problem is every time I talk about this, I get people looking at me like, come on, like that's just, nobody believes that. Okay, well, I can give you the citations, the documentations, and it's not like they're hiding it. They're screaming it from the rooftops. Okay, and there are entire bodies of literature that support this. The fundamental assumptions of the woke movement are that racism, sexism, patriarchy are baked into the system. They are literally infused into the system. Okay, that's the fundamental, one primary assumption. Here is another primary assumption. You're going to have to take a minute to really intellectually digest this because it's just any disparity in outcome must be due to a system. Any disparity of outcome must be due to a system. And specifically, it must be due to a system working against a class of people whose ancestors have been historically oppressed and who themselves are currently oppressed. So I'm going to give you an example of that. So let's say, for example, I think the last statistic I read, don't quote me on this, but let's say a very small percentage of PhDs, I think it's 2%, but I could be wrong, don't quote me on that. Wilford Wiley, the academic, the black academic, not that should matter, but cites that. So why are there only, why, if blacks represent, say, 13% of the population, shouldn't they represent 13% of the PhDs? The idea is that any disparity in outcome has to be rooted in some kind of a system problem in which the system is working against people. So we can talk about that, but I want to answer the rest of your question. Now, in case anybody wants, this isn't participatory yet, but in case you want to know my opinion, yeah, there is systemic racism, and it's systemic racism against Asians. Asian Americans consistently outscore everybody except Ashkenazi Jews on standardized tests. And there are measures in place at elite schools to limit or cap the number of Asians. And this is not me. I mean, you look, don't believe anything I say. Look up.
This is public knowledge.
This is up to 100%. Kenny XU, I think his name is right. So I can give you the documentation for this. This is absolutely, literally 10 seconds on Google and we'll find it. They are systemically discriminated against. Okay, so you got the idea that racism is baked into this, racism, sexism, misogyny, et cetera, is baked into the system. You have the idea that any disparity in outcome has to be due to systems, and the way to remediate or address that or fix that or solve that is through what I said before. It's through equity. It's through equity. Equity is, again, the idea that there are other words too, but that equity, diversity, inclusion, and again, these words do not mean what you think they mean. So diversity, so equity, making up for that by, for example, I don't know, giving, you know, on a hiring process, making sure that someone who's like gay or trans or what have you, they get pushed up to the top of the list in the hiring decision. So equity is the solution, their solution, a deranged solution, but a solution nonetheless, to the problem of historical and contemporary injustice.
The affirmative action is linked to equities.
A little bit. Affirmative action is like cultural 1.0 stuff.
I know, I'm aware of that. But it's somehow linked to the...
Yeah, it could be, but the tools that are used now are far more sophisticated. They're sophisticated because they've changed the meanings of words around the the infrastructure that supports the woke ideology is now much more sophisticated than it was 30 or 40 years ago. I mean, we've had, look.
Did you agree with the affirmative action at that time?
Oh boy.
When it was in place, when they started to do that?
I never really-
Especially at university, I'm not talking about hiring at companies, but at universities, for instance.
Yes and no. So I believe that just society, like the philosopher John Rawls, a just society is a fair society. And the way that we make a fair society is we give everybody a public education of the first rate. Whether they're Roma, I think they're called gypsies here, but we call them in English Roma, whether they're people from poor neighborhoods, whether they're ethnic Hungarians, it doesn't matter what they are. We give everybody an opportunity to succeed and excel primarily through education. And you don't try to fix things on the back end. You try to give people opportunities so that they can succeed.
Okay, but if you fail and you cannot fix on the level or on the bottom,
The problem is that we've not done that. The problem is that you still, so the way that education works in the United States is it's a terrible thing. The school systems in the United States are in terrible condition, particularly in major cities that are poor like Detroit. And many of those kids happen to be black and they're trapped in terrible schools. And I've seen a lot of talk about Black Lives Matter. I've seen a lot of talk about equity, inclusion, diversity, belonging, etc. Well, I've seen almost none of these schools being fixed. I've seen these poor black kids, not only black kids, but these poor kids are trapped in schools. They have to bring their own toilet paper. They're victims of gun violence. It's a terrible problem. But the way to think about the problem is to think about it in terms of equality of opportunity, to give everybody opportunities to succeed and thrive and live a good life. The way to think about the problem is not to try to make the outcomes the same. A very good friend of mine, Matt Thornton, said this to me. This is a really interesting thing. He said, if you truly believed in equity, you would send the worst singers to the best singing schools.
I read an interview with you, and you said that a main feature, a main characteristic of the woke movement is that they do not accept dialogue.
Correct.
They say that dialogue is, in fact, you said that is an epistemic pushback,
Yeah.
which is meant to keep up the patriarchy.
Correct.
And
Dialogue is a tool.
dialogue is in fact racist.
Correct.
The tool of the dialogue is a racist
Correct.
tool. Is that correct?
Yeah.
They think that we don't need, in a democratic society, we don't need dialogue. So you just say something.
But they don't believe in democracy. So the question fails right there. So they believe that privilege will always seek to preserve itself. Privilege, like, so, if you're born white or in this worldview, white or wealthy or able-bodied, you talk about, that's another one, like we can walk in, there's nobody in here with a wheelchair. So we have a form of ableism privilege. Anytime I would have a conversation with you, this is literally, you want to throw your whole society into a toilet, you start having people believe this, and then you'll be there in no time. Dialogue, the purpose of dialogue is for privilege to sustain itself. The purpose of conversation, the purpose of discourse is for people who have privilege and power to stay in power and keep their privilege. It's this is total culture war 2.0 stuff. So you have the people who believe that and the people not. Now, in culture war 1.0, nobody believed that. You could take the most militant Christian, well, maybe somebody believed that, but like virtually nobody believed that. Because the idea, so for example, if Richard Dawkins gave a talk about evolution and Christians didn't like it, they didn't think there was evolution or whatever they thought, they wouldn't call him a racist, they wouldn't bring a bullhorn in, they wouldn't throw feces on him, they wouldn't throw eggs on him, they would want to debate him, they would want to challenge his ideas, they'd ask questions at the end. But we're dealing with people right now who do not believe in the rudiments of what we have built democracies upon. Discourse, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. I don't know if you have due process here. I would imagine you have something like it. Yeah, okay, well, due process.
Have common law, but we have some similar procedures.
Yeah, Miranda rights. All of these things are viewed as instruments of the powerful to preserve their power. And they want to dismantle these. And one of the main ways to dismantle these is to defund the police. Because once you defund the police are the things, the police are the people who keep, this is the view, the banking industry. So again, I'm going to tell you this, and people are looking like, wow, this is like this guy's some kind of conspiracy theory. No, this is what they actually believe. I published a piece in the Wall Street Journal, and I think it was, when social justice warriors tell you something, believe them. You should totally believe them. Not believe that it's true, but you should totally believe that they mean it. They completely mean it. So they believe, this is why, for example, they go and they destroy statues. I'm from the city of, well, I live in the city of Portland. And some unprecedented number of days rioting, looting, destroying the city, toppling all the statues. So they believe that if you can defund the police, if you can take away the police, that they're also anti-capitalist. You can fell the main drivers of systemic inequality in the system. And the only thing that's stopping that is the police. So if you can defund the police, we should go after the banking system, the regulatory apparatus, everything.
You didn't answer, when did this become dominant in the universities?
It's tough to say. I mean, it's tough to say. I first noticed, personally, I noticed it around 2012, and then it just went up. Jordan Peterson talks about how it leaks out of the university, but it probably reached a critical mass in around 2015, 2016. And it did so by one of the ways it did, which is your other question, is through the use of words. Can I give you an example? So, listen, if I say to you, I'm going to have a show of hands. How many people think we should have an inclusive environment in here? We should be inclusive. Raise your hand if we could. Raise them high. Okay. How many people think we should not have an inclusive environment? Okay. How many people don't know? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we got a lot of people who didn't vote, but we got like 6 people who don't know.
Yeah, they abstain.
You can abstain, that's fine. This is a free country. So most people in here think we should have an inclusive environment, right? Because you use the word inclusive is the way that, like, what's in the dictionary. Oh, that's the other thing. They're going after the dictionaries. But you can look at how the definition of racism, for example, has changed in the dictionaries in the last 3 years. You ask how this happened. It's like a crescendo. It slowly builds. Let me tell you very briefly what inclusion means. An inclusive environment means a welcoming environment. Who wouldn't want to welcome? You want to welcome? I want a welcoming environment. I want people to come in here who are blacks and, I don't know, in wheelchairs. I want an inclusive environment. You want that, right? I mean, everybody. Now, if I said that, everyone would be like, "Yeah, well, of course we want a welcoming environment." Okay, So, in order to have a welcoming environment, you have to make sure that people aren't offended. Because if people are offended, then they won't feel welcome. So in order to have an inclusive environment, you have to restrict speech. So an inclusive environment is an environment that restricts speech. That's what an inclusive environment is.
Where you remain silent, basically.
Huh?
Where you remain silent, you don't express your opinion.
No, because silence is a form of complicity. But if silence is violence, but so is speech. Everything is violence. Silence is violence, speech is violence, everything is violence. So if you want to protect your society, if you want to protect Romania, if you want to protect your culture, one of the first orders of business that you must do is you must not let people use English words. You must not let them use these words. You must not let them use diversity, because that's also a word that does. And if I said to you, how many people want a diverse environment in here? Raise your hand if you want a diverse environment. Okay, like, no, every sane person will be like, yeah, well, does not mean what you think it means. It means homogeneity of opinion, one particular opinion. So when you start hearing young people in particular use these words, correct them. Don't allow it. Don't allow it in your institutions. Don't allow the English-speaking vocabulary of these particular words to come in, because that's how it weasels, it worms its way into institutions.
This is one of the main elements of the European Union. Unity in diversity.
Yeah. So maybe we should talk about that. We should probably talk about that. Yeah. We should probably talk about that.
If you disagree with the woke movement,
Yeah.
can you be, according to the general perception, can you be a liberal intellectual, or you are labeled as a conservative if you are against the woke movement?
This is the way you should think about it. Steven Pinker, the Harvard psychologist, has a great example. So think of a globe. So if you have a globe, for the woke people, he calls it the left pole. If you're on the left pole, literally everybody looks like they're on the right. Same thing with the right. If you're on the far right, everybody looks like they're on the left. When you're woke and buy into these things, here's another characteristic of wokeness. Excuse me. The more woke you are, the more you realize that you're not woke enough. You can never be woke enough for the woke.
Secular religion.
It's a secular religion, right? It's a secular religion that has very specific rules about blasphemy, which is political correctness. Published a piece in 2014 about privilege being the original sin. So Christians had original sin. Woke people have blasphemy. James Lindsay from New Discourses has some wonderful material on this. But some people think it's John McWhorter just wrote a book about this, which is fantastic.
So can you be a liberal and anti-woke?
Yeah. So that's the other thing. So it's very interesting. I had dinner in Hungary, and I think this is because, I don't know this, but I think it's because the Hungarian language is so complicated. It's difficult.
It doesn't resemble Italian as a language, is right?
Yeah, no, I think it's difficult for wokeness to get in because of the language.
So we are protected.
Yeah, you're protected. You're protected. I had.
So we shouldn't speak English then.
No. Well, yeah, that's the other.
The English channel it counts.
Certainly words. No. Certainly certain words shouldn't use. But I had a really interesting dinner with two people, two brutal critics of Orban, like truly, like just despise the man. And what was interesting about that, Neil, was that one of these guys, they're both kind of well known. Both of these people who are on the left, very left, are both anti-woke. In the United States, you just don't see that. Like that's, I shouldn't say it's not impossible to find that, but it's virtually impossible. Like you have old school people like Noam Chomsky, but virtually everybody on the left now is consumed in the orbit of identity. This is identity politics.
Yeah, sure.
Thinking about things in terms of personal identity, sexuality, etc. They've been consumed by this. So I actually found it super refreshing to go to these guys' houses and, well, one of the guys' houses, the other one, we went out for dinner and drinks, but to have conversations with people who are on the left who aren't woke. They're very productive conversations. Like, what do you dislike?
It's easy for them. They live in Hungary, not in the United States.
Yeah, that's the thing. Okay. Yeah. Here's the other thing that you need to know about the left. So this is the other reason why you should really, if you're on the left in here, why you really want to keep this out. One of the things that I got from the conversations with these leftists was that when Orban criticizes wokeness, the woke people are giving Orban something to be correct about. They're giving him something to be right about. And they don't want Orban to be right about anything, like literally freaking nothing. So you're handing him a suite of beliefs, of propositions that sane people will say, oh my God, that's right. So it's in their interest to keep wokeness out because it defangs Orban. It gives him less power. It gives him less things that normal people, sane people say, oh yeah, look at that. Well, of course, if a boy is, 8, he shouldn't have his penis cut off. Well, I mean, duh. I mean, it's obvious, right? But it's not obvious if you participate in the ideology. In fact, if you participate in the ideology, we call it gender affirmation surgery.
You say that in many instances the left is somehow doing promoting identity politics, and I agree with you. But I also can say that on the right-wing parties are doing identity politics, and they bring tradition and religion into the politics.
Correct.
That's identity politics too. Don't you think that these left-wing parties, somehow they found out this identity politics from the right-wing parties, and they thought that would be a response to the right-wing identity politics?
Okay, so you have two issues there. One issue is, and then I'll get directly. I think it's really helpful to not think about this in terms of right and left, but to think about it in terms of an authoritarian impulse. So one of the things that the left has done extremely well is, have you heard of cancellation, to cancel people? Yeah, cancel culture, that's exactly correct. The impulse to cancel has nothing to do with the left. My friend Dan Sad, who I think was here, talked about it as a parasitic mind. It's parasitized the left. And for sure, there are many things about which I'd happily criticize the right, particularly people like Bolsonaro destroying the whole planet, more or less, the rainforest. There are many things, private new PM of Italy, there are many things to criticize the right about. One of the things that you see in the new culture war is the switching from, like I said, Christians. So there are anti-woke Christians and anti-woke atheists combining forces against woke Christians and woke atheists. Holy moly, that's weird. It's weird that Rod Dreher, a conservative Christian, like an Orthodox, super uber conservative Christian, is a very close personal friend of mine. I would not have thought that would have been the case 10 years ago, or 15 years ago. But I think that the way that's very helpful to think about this is to think about the authoritarian impulse. And when you think about it from who's the authoritarian, who wants to control what you say? Who wants to control how you live? Who wants to control what you think? Who wants to control where your genitals go? When you think about that, it's much more helpful than a right-left distinction.
Thank you. And I think we had 45 minutes. So we arrived at the section of questions and answers. The organizer said that I should use this for the
Okay, great. Let's do it.
for the questions.
Okay.
The first one is there a possibility that this woke culture will be disappeared?
No. I just want to add, while he does that, I want to add one thing. The word saber. Saber is like it's like a sword, but it's like a thick kind of sword that people used to use to kill each other. Fortunately, they don't feed them over it. One thing you see in this culture war is that people who are on the right and people who are on the left are putting down their sabers, fighting each other, and they're going after woke people and woke ideology. Like Ben Shapiro, I don't know if you know who he is. I'm kind of familiar with him. I've moved his book. People who you would never think would associate with each other, almost ever, have agreed for a peace treaty until a greater threat to the institutions and the democracy is dealt with. What happens after that? I don't know. We'll probably start fighting again. I have no idea. But until then,
You're allies now.
pretty much there's not just a ceasefire. It's way beyond a ceasefire.
On a scale of 1 to 10,
Yeah.
how sure are you in your approach of impossible conversations? What would change your answer?
Data, evidence would change my mind. If I saw You can go to some YouTube channels. Reed Nicewonder has one. Anthony Magnabosco has one. People have, there's something called street epistemology. And people go and they have conversations with other people. Oh, you can go to my YouTube channel. Just, I think it's like Dr. Peter Boghossian or Peter Boghossian. And I have these conversations with people. I'm going to do them tomorrow. I don't know anybody. We haven't arranged. I haven't said anything like, oh, we need this person to say this. I have no idea what anybody's going to say. I would need evidence. I would need to see that the techniques in the book did not work when applied. And if I saw that, I would certainly change my mind.
The second question, it seems like in history, people with the most powerful role in the world are people who are not listening. Because they can't, they have to solely believe their ideology.
Correct.
Could a listener be a leader?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure I know the answer to that in terms of I couldn't cite a paper or a piece of literature. It seems that it depends on what the context in which you want to lead in. It would seem to me that if you really wanted to be a leader, you'd have to listen to your subordinates. I try not to be political. I'm not really a political person. I have been deeply moved and affected by the Ukrainian war. Seems to me that Putin is a person who simply does not listen, or people tell him exactly what he wants to hear, and then he's caused this humanitarian crisis. It would seem to me, I would need evidence and data to support this, but it would seem to me that if you wanted to be a good leader, you'd need to listen to people so you can figure out what their problems and concerns are. But again, that's just maybe a common sense answer. I can't provide you with a study.
Maybe a democratic leader, not an authoritarian leader.
But even if you're an authoritarian leader like Putin or a kleptocrat, even if you don't listen, then or people just want to tell you what you want to hear, it's not clear that the type of leader you are is going to produce the outcome that you want.
The third question, how do you interact with someone who aggressively wants to preach their belief to you and your group of friends or family?
Oh, that's a great question. So what was supposed to be a 15-minute talk, I didn't talk about, but one of the things that you always want to do in the beginning of your talk is ask yourself what your goal is. What's your purpose? Why am I in this conversation? When you figure that out, it's easier. What you don't want to do in those conversations is deliver a message. So they're delivering a message to you, you're delivering a message. So one of the things that you can do is you can try to figure out, really trying to figure out why they believe it, why they believe what they believe. The other thing is you can decide whether or not you want to remain in the conversation. So I always would ask questions, trying to figure out what it would take them to change their mind after the scale. I use the same template that I just gave you. I would follow that, but I would only follow that if I really first thought about whether or not I wanted to be in the conversation at all.
And could you reach a point where you would like to persuade him or making him to question somehow his beliefs? Would that be a moment in this procedure?
So I never try to persuade anybody of anything. I just give them the tools to persuade themselves. And there's a distinction.
Okay. I think this is important.
Yeah. The moment you start persuading is the moment that you're, that's why you have to end on questions and not statements. The moment you try to persuade, then you create a barrier for people to change their minds.
The fourth question, do you believe that people can be right? If yes, how can you ever know if you are not wrong?
Do I believe that people can be right? Yeah, people can be right. People are right all the time. The very fact that we're sitting in a building now means that some people were right? They were right about the construction, the materials, the mathematics that went into making the building. So yeah, every time you drive over a bridge, we have people who are right. And what was the second half of this? Is it too much technology to go back?
Do you believe that people can be right? If yes, how can you ever know if you are not wrong?
It's tricky. How can you ever know? How can you ever know that how do you know you're always right?
Now,
that-
how do you know that you are not wrong?
How do you know you're not wrong? Oh, okay, if phrased like that, okay. It depends on what the domain is. I mean, you know, like let's say that you're out on a date with someone and you like them, and how do you know you're not wrong about the fact that you like them? It depends on the domain or the sphere. How do you know you're not wrong about what? You know, like a matter of personal taste, an objective fact about the world. If it's a fact about the world, you just match your belief to the evidence. It's pretty simple. If it's a subjective thing, if it's personal, that's a little more complicated.
What methods do you recommend for self-criticism? How do you know that it is good for the other person to change his or her behavior?
In the Gorgias, Plato, Socrates says, it is better to be refuted than it is to refute. In other words, it's better for you to be shown that you have a false belief and shed it. So, as a general rule, when you can apply this stuff on yourself, it's excellent. Like if you can start
Questioning yourself.
Yeah, so the way that I think about it is I always try to have fewer false beliefs. So it's less than I'm looking for the truth, which I am, but it's more so that I want to be more humble about what I believe, and then I want to stop believing things that are false. I don't know if I answered that. Can you go back? Because I have a thing in my head saying I didn't answer the whole question.
I repeat the question. What methods do you recommend for self-criticism? How do you know that it is good for the other person to change his or her behavior?
Yeah, that was the one I did. So methods of self-criticism, hold on, is talk to people with whom you disagree and ask them what the problem with your reasoning is. Not your conclusion, your reasoning. What is the problem with my reasoning that got me here? And the second, what was the last one? What's the last sentence?
How do you know that it is good for the other person to change his or her behavior?
Yeah, well, okay, that seems pretty obvious. It depends on what the behavior is. I mean, you know, one of the most, this is going to be such an American thing to say, but you know, one of the most difficult things to me every time I come to Hungary, I've lived in Hungary for 4 months. I just can't stand it. The smoking in this country is driving me fucking bananas. I gasp when I walk outside. Everybody is smoking constantly. They're smoking by my gym. They're smoking. So how do I know? I can guarantee you the cancer rates would be far lower if we had people, far fewer people smoked, and they smoked a lot less.
Some years ago, they smoked in restaurants and inside, you know.
Yeah, I don't know if I could live. I don't know if I could live here, honestly, or whatever. I don't know. I was in Austria, everybody's smoking. I don't know.
Yeah.
So clearly some people have self-destructive and harmful behaviors. Clearly that's the case.
How do you think you can remain friends with someone who has beliefs that are against my being?
Mm-hmm.
For example, being part of a minority and friends not supporting it.
Yeah.
It would go against my being.
Yeah, that's tough. That's tough. I mean, I've lost a lot of personal friends. Just thinking about this, I've lost 4 very, very close friends of mine. People in my home, partied with them, had a great time. 3 of whom were caught in the orbit of wokeness, and they're upset with what I'm doing with woke ideology, and they've kind of, so that's tricky. I guess it would depend. I ended that when I said let friends be wrong. You don't have to agree with everybody. I have 2 children. I've adopted a daughter from China who's now 16. I have a son who's 21, and both of my kids are gay. And I think a deal breaker for me would be if someone hated gay people. Like I just think that would be the deal breaker, and that's definitely informed by my children. Of course, it is, because I love my children very much. But I think in every conversation, in every relationship, you have to ask yourself, what's the deal breaker? Christopher Hitchens spoke eloquently about that. And there are always some things that if someone will harm a child or do something horrible, I mean, that would be my deal breaker. So you have to figure out at what point that there's somebody who holds a belief or does an action. I can be friends with someone who smokes. I just can't hang out with them when they smoke. So at what point is someone engaged in a belief or behavior that it just crosses the line for you? And for me, it would be like the hatred of homosexuals. That would be it.
What do you think Culture War 3.0 will be about?
Oh, that's an easy question. I can tell you exactly what it's about. Culture War 3.0 will be legacy institutions versus non-legacy institutions. It will be so a legacy institution is something that's been around, very venerable organization for a long time. New York Times, Wall Street Journal, in media, or ACLU, the kind of the gatekeepers. Culture War 3.0, we can already see the tiny emergence of it. Is on the founding faculty at the University of Austin. That's a new thing. It will be legacy institutions versus new things. And I think I mentioned it before, the renowned psychologist Steven Pinker, he very much believes at Harvard University, et cetera, he'll be on the side of legacy, where someone like Jordan Peterson, Pinker and Peterson know each other very well, and they've both been very great to me. So this is only answering the question. It's not rendering an opinion, which I'll do in a second. It's not saying someone's wrong, in other words. Substack challenges regular media, independence versus legacy. I personally fall very, very strongly on the side in Culture War 3.0, on the side of against legacy institutions. I think legacy institutions have been ideologically captured, particularly university systems.
Is there a possibility that this woke culture will be stopped? And if yes, by who or how?
Yeah, it will. So you're not going to have to worry about this, hopefully, too much longer. I'll preface that by saying I have been wrong in the past. So I've made predictions about when, every time I think we've gotten to peak crazy and it couldn't get any more insane, it keeps getting more insane. The only question is, it has an expiration date, and I can explain why. In order for an ideology to perpetuate itself in a society, it has to have an apologia. It has to have some kind of defense mechanism. The woke ideology has no built-in defenses within the ideology. So, for example, that's why they can't have conversation, because conversation would challenge the belief. Look, if I went on Twitter tomorrow, I know that Hungarians, Romanians don't use Twitter, and said, hey, I want to debate a Christian, I'll be at this, I have 200 Christians would be lining up for me. If I said, hey, I want to debate someone on a woke topic, or nobody would come. In order for a belief system to perpetuate itself, to move forward, it has to have some mechanism in place that defends its own ideas. Woke ideology has the exact opposite of that. There's no debates allowed, no discussions. It's the exact opposite of that. And because of that, it has to push itself forward some other way other than through rational means. It has to. There's no choice but to. So it's going to die. I don't know when, but I can promise you it's going to die.
You basically claim that it's impossible for the woke ideology, because of this characteristic, to gain public support, wide range public support?
No, it can totally gain wide range public support, but it can't sustain itself. It's inherently unsustainable. It literally cannot sustain itself by an epistemic means. In other words, it cannot sustain itself by giving reasons for its existence, because to have reasons for its existence, you would have to know the arguments against why it's a bad thing. And I don't know literally anybody at the highest echelons of woke academia who know the arguments against their own positions. Like literally nobody, it's unheard of. Christians do that, they're great. Muslims don't really know it. Even the best Muslim apologists don't know it.
I see.
Because that in context of Islam is a case of blasphemy. But we don't have that sanction in Christendom.
Why is advice for a young woman to leave the conversation if it was unsuccessful?
No, she felt unsafe.
Yeah, I understand, but
Yeah.
understood what you said.
Yeah.
I think it was a misunderstanding here. Would you consider the succession of culture war as a dialectical process with the result of reaching a better society?
No. I
That
used,
Marxism was
Yeah.
similar
Yeah,
to a better society.
Yeah, I'm not only that, I'm not even sympathetic to that idea, but I do believe, as Martin Luther King said, my friend Michael Shermer wrote a book about this, I do believe that the moral arc bends towards justice.
But what, sorry, I didn't.
Martin Luther King, the moral arc bends towards justice. We're becoming, Steve Baker again, oddly enough, came up, wrote a book, The Better Angels of Our Nature. Things are getting better. I was in Hungary in 1996, and it's improved dramatically in my lifetime. Things are getting better. There are blips, of course, and things could happen that are horrific that I won't mention on the border, but things overall are definitely getting better in society. There's simply the documentation for that is overwhelming. And I do believe morally we're progressing as a society. That doesn't mean it's perfect. Yes, there have been notable exceptions, but things are getting better.
Do you think that anybody's mind can be changed, even the ones who are 100% sure of their beliefs?
Yeah, all the time. In fact, we have a word for that. The word for that in English is called apostasy. Apostasy. If you're an apostate, for example, in Islam, for example, you used to believe, and the punishment, I think, in 11 countries for apostasy is death.
Yes,
Yeah. So you used to be a Muslim, and then you changed and you became an atheist or, I don't know, Christian or Buddhist or something. Yeah, so people change their minds all the time, constantly.
Did you meet many people, having met many people who changed their mind?
Yeah, all the time. I mean,
And they had strong beliefs?
yeah, you can see any of my videos. I have videos on that. Well,
Did you succeed to persuade the religious people to be
I haven't
atheists?
persuaded anybody of anything. I've only
No,
been
not persuading, to have that final step that he
all the time. Yeah, constantly.
became an atheist from
Yeah.
a Christian?
And I've actually had exactly the opposite happen. Dozens of people have emailed me or contacted me or run into the streets. You know, I used to be an atheist and I read your book and I started questioning the way that you said, and now I'm a believing Christian. Okay, well, good, great. In other words, so now you know why you believe. Judaism is different, but now you know why you believe what you believe and you have better reasons for it. So great. I mean, that's the other thing. That's the kind of society we want. We want a society that values liberty. People can believe anything they want. I can challenge you on what you believe. You can challenge me on what you believe. You can answer me. I can answer you. But the society we don't want is when people tell you what to believe. And they tell you who you can speak to. And they tell you who you can assemble with. And they tell you what you can read. That's the society you don't want. You want free, open societies that have cognitive liberty, free speech, discourse, discussion, democracy, freedom of assembly, the press, etc.
That's too classical liberalism.
Is it classroom? Yeah, that's why the liberal conservative doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
Because you have the people who want liberty and you have the people who don't. And if someone who wants liberty who happens to believe, who's a born-again Christian or Muslim or whatever, I'm far more aligned with them ideologically than I am with an authoritarian.
Do you think that a counter-woke wave or a reactionary wave will end the current academic norm of wokeness?
No, you can't. That's why I'm in Culture War 3.0. I don't believe it can be ended in the academy. The academy is gone. It's gone. Forget about it. It's gone. It's completely done. You have people who have jobs for life. You're not getting them out. And you're not going to wait them out to die because many of them are in their 30s and 40s. It's done.
Trump will end it?
No one can end it.
Comes to power.
No, nobody can end it. The only thing you can do is you can build new institutions. That's what you have to do. You want to fight this, you build, Romania is different, but in the United States, you build new institutions.
A parallel university system.
That's exactly what you have to do.
And things seriously, that may happen.
Well, I'm already doing it.
Okay.
Yeah, University of Austin is doing it. Is over $100 million, 550 acres. Stephen Blackwood's Ralston College is another example. People who are building alternative institutions, alternative academic institutions, and the response has been unbelievable for the number of people who want to teach there, for the people who want to go there, because people are just sick of it. They want to go, they want to know what people believe who don't think like they do, and they want to have conversations. They want to be honest about what they believe. And if you look at the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, most people, most college students, even those who are, self-identifying on the left, are not comfortable speaking openly and honestly about things. And the number of college students, I wish I remember the figure, that thought that violence is an acceptable response to speech is just horrifyingly high. Yeah, it's crazy. That's why the institutions are gone. Forget about it.
Was there something drastic or not drastic you changed your mind about?
Oh, boy, all constantly. Yeah, so I've been wrong about a lot of things. I'll give you one that I just did that we talked about at lunch. So, I ask people questions. I ask people on the streets questions, and then I post those videos. One of the questions I ask people, and that I'm going to ask people tomorrow, is, would you rather be ruled by the United States or by Russia? You don't have a choice. You can either be ruled by the United States or you can be ruled by Russia. Now, if you had asked me beforehand what percentage of Hungarians would have said the United States, I would have told you with complete sincerity, 99.99999. Turns out the response is very different. About a third of the Hungarians I've asked have said Russia. The other thing that was shocking to me is when I asked most people why they would want to rather be ruled by the United States. And remember, the question assumes you have no choice. So it's not independent. You either have Russia.
Either Russia
Yeah.
or the United States.
Yeah, I would have naturally assumed that people would have said, oh, because it's free. Like, that almost didn't come up at all. Almost every single person who went to the United States side said they did so for economic reasons. Completely changed my mind about that.
Yeah, I guess I told you when we had lunch that I guess that somehow this is linked to the actual political rhetoric. Somehow
It will be interesting when I do
5
this.
years ago, I think, or 10 years ago, you might have the chance to get other responses. This is my assumption.
Well, what's the name? Is a big square up here with the churches. I'm doing that tomorrow, and I'm going to ask people that question, and let's see what happens. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? See, the other thing is, if you did this in the United States, like this anonymous thing, you'd have like 200 people saying, you Nazi, you pig, you like horrible creature, go back to you should have been aborted, like, crazy stuff. And has there been any of those yet?
No.
Unbelievable.
I will warn you when it comes to the screen. What are the questions to ask when you want to keep a conversation going? Question to avoid small talk.
Yeah, that's a good question. You can use what's called a minimal encourager.
Minimal encourager?
Yeah, a minimal encourager is two techniques I'll give you. So someone says something to you like, oh, she's, we're talking, she's like, oh, I had a really crappy day at work. My boss is always complaining about something. And minimal encouragers, you take the last 2 or 3 words and repeat it back to her to let her know you're listening. Oh, complaining about something? And then she just runs with it. That's a minimal encourager. The other thing is you can ask what's called a calibrated question. Calibrated questions are, you want to try to avoid as a general rule, when people say yes or no. So you don't want to, as a general rule, you don't, to keep the conversation going, not just in a conversation. So a calibrated question would be, again, I don't know about any language other than English. but I assume you have the word how. Like, how do you do something? Yeah, it goes to show you about my Romanian and Hungarian. I only know very inappropriate words in Hungarian, but you would ask the question how, because when you say how, it doesn't lend itself to a yes or no. Like, oh, how do you think it should work? You can't really answer yes or no to that. So they have to kind of that keeps the conversation going.
We have 5 more questions.
Okay, let's do it. We'll do speed rounds.
Do you think that anybody's mind can be changed, even the ones who are 100? Oh, but this was, I think, we had this question.
Yes, I do.
Sorry. Sorry, something happened. Oh, so if a cannibal likes gay,
A cannibal?
yeah, cannibal,
A cannibal, like someone who eats humans? What's a creative?
you can be friends with them. PPL, I don't know what there is an abbreviation, PPL, I don't know what does that mean.
Let me think. If a
What is that,
cannibal,
PPL?
oh, people. So if I need, do, and I assume I know he's a cannibal. I know this person's a cannibal. Could I be friends with a cannibal? Well, let me think. Try to think. I guess the red line.
If you promise you that won't.
Well,
Well, if
if he's going to be a cannibal, he's not going to keep his promises, right? So if he's going to eat people, if I don't trust him not to eat people, he's certainly going to lie. So I guess it would depend. Like, if I knew someone who was a cannibal, who ate people, who killed people to eat them, then no. Now, could I be friends with somebody who ate dead people? I mean, I probably not. I'm trying to think, like, what if they were like a really nice person in every other way, they were totally reasonable? Could I, but I probably not. No, probably not. I think that would be my line.
On a scale of from 1 to 10, how dangerous is wokeism for Western culture and for the stability of Western nations?
Well, it depends on the degree. Moderate wokeism, the more woke a society is, the more danger to its primary institutions, its fundamental institutions. And the way that and not all institutions are the same. So you have to ask yourself, when wokeness gets in, it's worse that it gets into certain things. It's worse if it gets into the military. It's worse if it gets into medicine. It's extremely bad if it gets into colleges of education. Because if it gets into colleges of education, that's how it spreads to young people. The more woke it is, the more of a destabilizing effect it has on the society. In other words, the answer is it depends.
And this was the last question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, that was the last question.
Yeah.
I thought I had one more. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.